Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Chives alongside the main man, Steve-O. How you doing, Steve?
Well, I'm doing better now, Chives. That debacle was over. The Carolina game the other night. I was in the building, similar to you. I'm pretty sure it's a movie or a play, Les Miserables. I mean, that was the mood the other night. Sitting there watching the Carolina Hurricanes absolutely turning us over and spanking us on the ass cheek. I mean, that was gross to see. So, I mean, I'm doing better now that it's over, and we got some good news to talk about.
Steve-O's got the emotions in there, a lot on the docket. We got Carolina game recap. Brennan Othmann's called up. That was unprecedented for tomorrow. Plus, they take on Bedard tomorrow. So, big heavyweight rookie tilt coming up. And we also want to talk about some of Steve-O's hot takes on the year.
Let's do it. Let's talk some puck. And boy, oh boy, that game was really tough to watch. That is our worst game of the season, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I don't like how we're trending here, Chives. I could say, I think 2 weeks ago, I said, more like 2.5 weeks ago, that Leafs game, I said that was our worst game of the season. And then prior week before then, I said we had our worst loss of the season. And I see we're in a pattern here every single week where we're saying we need a rebound game. We need a rebound game this game.
Yeah.
We need a rebound game this game. The best team in the league does not need to say that every single, or at least once a week, that we need a rebound game. So I don't like the direction that we're trending in. And there's a lot of topics here that I think are issues with this team that we
Is
could
that
jump into.
is that one of your hot topics?
No, that's not one of the hot takes.
No, I know.
I'm
All
gonna
right,
fish
so
them out.
listen, this is what I'll say. Lavi, took ownership of it, and obviously he's not going to stand up there and after one loss with 25 wins say, oh, this is just terrible. He did say he used the word hate the other night. He said after the first period against Carolina, he said something along the lines of like that he hated the way certain things went. And you see that with the losses, how quickly I think he's worked so well with us in part because he's winning. I think he's a really, really great at communication. He's open to a lot of the questions, and that's something I never worked with Gerard Gallant, but that's something that seems like it was different with how he handled the media. And I respect both ways, but I do see that when they do lose, it's short conversations not only with the players, but with Lavi, and he threw that word around. I'll say this. I asked him about does the transition game 5-on-5, getting to the net, getting to the inside in the danger zones in the offensive zone, does that have anything to do with how pucks are broken out? And I think he understood where some of the questions were pointed to, but from between Larry Brooks, myself, Colin, Stevenson, Vince, Mercogliano, we were all kind of asking, and I didn't want to add on to that and like hack away at the specific things that like stood out, like that Schneider Shesterkin miscue. But they are things where Keandre Miller said a few weeks back after that Toronto loss, like a full 60. And that is a common phrase in hockey, but I feel like that is something that when they lose, they're like sometimes there's not even a first full 20.
Yeah. I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you want to say Lafreniere takes that penalty, 20, 25 seconds into the game? I mean, and that's,
That's hard. That ruins
that's
the
hard.
fluidity of the game, right?
It does. And, I mean, there's so many things, that we could point to that Carolina game, and we're not going to jump into all of them, but there's a few points that I think that weren't just issues in that game that I think are going to be issues moving forward. But I mean, the power play was definitely one of them. First of all, we were sloppy right off the bat. I mean, taking that penalty, Lafreniere just having zero, awareness of where he was on the ice. Bad penalty. You want to, and again, there was a lot of questionable calls, and the refs didn't help us out. I thought, Zibanejad. I mean, that play, I mean, we should have got a couple calls going our way, and we didn't. But you want to beat a team like this, stay out of the box. And even when we got opportunities, we couldn't connect, man. I mean, we said it here on the pod. 5-on-5 is a big issue, but when you can't score 5-on-5, you get those power play opportunities. You got to connect. And last night we did not. That was a big issue.
That was an issue. You surrendered 2 power play goals, right? And something that Laviolette also touched upon, which is natural. And I think sometimes when you think about statistics and the math, you forget about the fluidity of the game, like I just mentioned. That the first shift for the penalty killers was a penalty kill. Like there's no flow to the hockey game. You give up a goal, and now it's like we're trailing, and our our first line had a shift. Our second, or no, the second line started. For Zibanejad hasn't skated. Players like Brodzinski, Bonino, Nicky Bones. Want you to touch on that in a second. Fourth line, those guys didn't even get their legs under them. And granted, they're NHL skaters. They don't need it's not like the playoffs where it's like a rookie going in and they're shaking in their boots, but it still ruins the flow of the game. Even when you're on the man advantage and you're having a hard time getting zone entrances up a man. Now you're going back to 5-on-5. A lot of different layers. You don't want to lose a game like that, but I think the best thing again for the Rangers is to pick up, move forward. I think it's like you saw it where they lost in Florida too in a little bit of a track meet. So listen, there's small things, and Valaket said it after that game. And I said this to you earlier, just you and I. Like you play Carolina, you're gonna have to bounce back against Carolina. You're not gonna have Chicago in the playoffs the next night. And we're going to talk more about that with the hot topics too. But I know you spotlighted Nick Bonino and thought he was kind of balling out there last night.
I did, and in a night where it was our worst game of the season, there really weren't that many positives. I'd probably say Nick Bonino was probably one of the more positive things to take away. I mean, he was all
Yeah.
over the ice. I thought he had a good move to steal the puck, and get a real high quality shot on goal. He blocked a lot of shots too. I mean, that's one thing I will say about this team is they get in there and they block shots.
Mm-hmm.
And we're one of the best teams in blocking shots in the league. So that's one thing. But I mean, the defense, come on, you got to give Shesterkin a little bit more all around. I mean, you look at the goals that we gave out, minus the power play goals. I think they were team goals in general. I mean, the
Yeah.
puck was bouncing around the ice like a ping pong ball last night. I mean, take a look at Bunting's goal. I mean, that thing touched. I mean, it just unacceptable, all around in the National Hockey League. So this is definitely one that the Rangers want to put aside and move on quickly. And I'm happy that Chicago's up next, and not to overlook the Canadians a little bit, but ease in the schedule a little bit. Carolina's a good team, man. Their style of play is so unique, and I thought we didn't look good, but Carolina did look very strong in that game. They play the blue line so well, and that's one of the reasons why we struggled. We couldn't get any puck, anything going in their zone. We struggled to get the puck across the blue line. They
Mm-hmm.
defended that very well, and that's one of their strengths. One of the elements that makes Carolina scary to me is that when they get a lead early on in the game and they're up 3-1, they're up 2-1, that's their best game because the style of play and them defending the blue line, it's hard to counteract that. And that's the way they play. They play into that. So for me, that's what makes the Carolina Hurricanes so scary. I'll throw a hot take at you, but I want you to react to that first.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think something you said, and we've echoed on the podcast for a long time is you're going to have to adjust to the game of those top opponents in the East because you're going to have to face them. And they did well in the first game. You lost Filipino and Adam Fox. And in this game, I thought there's also a point where I didn't think the game necessarily got away from them in the first period. I think what happened too was they came out with jump in the second period, started to get a few chances, and then you have a gaff in your own zone. Like you said, I think their game is they want to shut you down and they play that trap style. And I thought it was more prominent than I've seen it in a little while last night. I really think they're digging in and sticking to that in order to climb the standings. They didn't have a great start. So I agree with that, Steve-O. And with the weaker schedule, that's going to help a certain player that got called up. But I don't know what your little take was. So.
All right, let's dish them out. Definitely what I've seen over the course of the last 2.5 weeks, 3-ish weeks. Right now, I think the Carolina Hurricanes are a better team than we are. That's definitely one of my hot takes. Carolina is better than us. I'm not gonna say way better, but Carolina's better as of right now. I'm saying who do I like? In our conference, I like Carolina and Chives. I don't think we're the second best team in the conference. I like the Florida Panthers. I think the Florida Panthers are better than we are. And it has nothing to do that those are the teams that just beat us. I'm looking at overall, and the way they play the game, their depth. I think the standings are very deceiving at this point. Now, listen, was that the best last night? Because at that point we were the best team in the league. We did not look like the best team in the league, and certainly there's a lot of holes on this team the way you look at it, and we could jump into that separately. But I think the Panthers are better than us right now, and I think Carolina is better than us right now. Aside from those two teams, I think we're third. I think we're a good team, no doubtably in my mind, Chives. We are a better team than we were last year. But to me, right now, Carolina and Florida are scary. Two teams I would not want to play in the playoffs.
Yeah. Now something that I think is I disagree, but what I will say is you're going to have to likely play these opponents
For sure.
in the playoffs. And I don't know, it might not be these two teams specifically, but you're going to have to play opponents that, in 2021-22, the Rangers ended the season and I think they played Carolina twice towards the end. And all I could think was like, the Rangers play Carolina, they're going to lose in 5. Like, they don't have a shot at beating this team. They ended up winning game 7, right? But with that stated, listen, it's tough to think ahead, but you're going to have to face one of those teams, right? Like Pittsburgh, I think gave the Rangers a run for their money in the first round. A lot of people had them picked in 5 that year. And granted, we're talking about a different team, different year, but you understand it's like you kind of have to play Tampa at some point if you're going to make it far. Not right now, but that was the way it was for a number of years. Was at some point if you're in the Atlantic, at some point if you're in the Eastern Conference, you'll likely face a team like Tampa. You'll likely face Carolina. So I think a lot of people counted out Florida. I do think they're playing really well, and I do think the Rangers stockpile wins in the beginning of the season is helping them. But at the same time, I don't think I watch enough of the Panthers individually to say anything. And I do think Carolina's system beat the Rangers last night, but I also think the Rangers beat the Rangers last night. There were self-inflicted things that I think if they do right, they win that game.
Yeah, and that's another take that I could throw at you is I don't think, and again, I'm not overreacting. We talk about sounding the alarm. No, I don't think it's time to sound the alarm. I think there's certain holes on our team, and we do have a couple guys out on injury, but I'm looking at this team, I'm analyzing it, and I don't know what you're gonna get out of Blake Wheeler. I saw he's a big guy last night. I mean, he stands out on the ice.
Mm-hmm.
He's somebody that really doesn't live up to what we thought he was. And I think I might have, I think we both agreed that Gustafson was the signing of the offseason, but Blake Wheeler was certainly, I think we gave him like a B or a B plus, I think B plus. He has not lived up to that. And then last night, I mean, the miscues were just a couple times he threw the puck out of our zone. I mean, you could see that he's just something's a little bit off. Slow. He was also a little slow. Carolina was way faster than we were, but Blake Wheeler was definitely a player that stood out to me. So as of right now, I just don't see if we have to play Carolina, our system isn't built to come back and win games with the way Carolina is the way their system is built. And let me explain. Carolina's going to feed and thrive on those games. They're up 3-1, they're up 2-1. Their style is hard to come back. And I don't think, especially the production, when it struggled, we're struggling on the first, second lines, and we're struggling 5-on-5. I don't think our depth is as strong as we all thought it was. And I don't think our depth plays to our record. I think, again, like I said, the Stanley Cup is not won in 2023. And I don't think it's a major issue, but I think we I think we overachieved a little bit. I don't think our record is as good as our team's current status is right now. From what I've seen, again, we're not bad. I think we're a great team. I think we're way better than we were last year, but I don't think we're the best team in the league, Charles. And I don't think I'll throw another hot take at you. I don't think we're going to win the President's Trophy, and quite frankly, I don't want to. I don't want to win the President's Trophy because I think it sets a high standard. We've seen it these last few years. We saw it last year, and I don't want that clout surrounding this team. I'm okay with being a 2.
I'll say this too. For all the listeners out there that don't believe in sports curses, that is one that really, really exists. I mean, I think there's only been like one Stanley Cup winner recently. Was it Chicago in 2013? Did Colorado
Yep.
win the cup and
Yep.
win the President's Trophy?
Yes. They that's a one-off
That's
scenario though.
just so, but it's like bizarre. Like Boston last year, you don't want to be in that boat.
I
And
don't want to be in that boat. I don't.
right, like I think if you're watching and you're, the New York Rangers, obviously that's not what you're thinking. It's not in your jurisdiction. Like you just want to compete to be the best team. But part of that invites teams to really get up to play you and really study you. And I think you saw that. You had a hungry group that's growing a culture in Florida to knock off Boston last year. You don't want a situation where the wild card team is going to be like Tampa, or the wild card team is New Jersey, or the wild card team is Carolina, because they I'm not going to say they'll defeat the Rangers. You never know, but I think they're going to take it to you. They're not going to be like um a team that kind of you can skate by. I don't think that's one, the Eastern Conference the last 2 years, and two, I just don't think that's the case specifically this year, especially with the way, as you mentioned, that the standings can be deceptive, right? Now with that, the Rangers have some soft games coming up, right? You mentioned Chicago, Montreal, then they have Vancouver Monday. That's a pretty big one. With that, they're bringing up a soon to be 22-year-old prospect that we've been talking about for quite some time, Brennan Othmann. Brennan Othmann, 22, 9 goals for Hartford. He's going to likely play in I would assume, the third line with Brodzinski and Cooley, little Hartford Wolfpack line. I love if they stuck them together. I don't see him coming into the fold and replacing Blake Wheeler. Like, I don't think that's the case either.
Me too.
Um, I just think that's realistic, right? And I think you want to put him in a position to succeed, and that means by not giving him, like, you're not going to insert him into the top six, but you're going to put him into a position to have some scoring chances, play 12 minutes against Chicago, see how it goes. Obviously, I think they have faith in him, and Tyler Pitlick goes down. You know who I think moves Steve-O and makes a really formidable fourth line? Nicky Bones. I think he goes to 4C, and I think that's how it's going to go for Othman, and I think this is a good soft spot. Like there couldn't, I wouldn't say it couldn't have been a better time. You never obviously would wish upon anything, an injury or something like that to happen. But if there was an injury and a time to call up your top prospect, it's now, right? Like you have a game against Chicago and a game against Montreal. You
Yeah.
want to make a rookie comfortable, right? Like,
Yeah, and it's cool that we get to see Connor Bedard come in.
mhm.
But listen, I think we're ready for it. We had a poll up on the Instagram, and it was overwhelmingly in support of everybody wants to see him. Everybody's ready. I don't think one person said that they didn't want to see him. I think this is obviously the future in so many different ways. And I think this, not to say that it's the spark we need, because again, I think we have our own faults, especially within the top six. But I'm all for it. I want to see what he brings to the table. And again, it's going to be a good. How do I say this? It's going to be a good welcome in, for a team that isn't, a top tier team. We just played a top tier team.
Mhm.
Chicago is the opposite of that. So I think we need a get right game. But also, I think this is kind of, not to say this rallies a fan base, but it definitely makes me feel better after what I watched last night, because I mean, on all aspects, I mean, that was just, I felt like I was watching high school hockey last night. I mean, that's how bad it was. But I'll ask you this: do you think that Othman provides the spark we need in a moment like this, after we just got our butts whipped?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of like for lack of better words, extreme. Like I don't think this team needs a spark, right? Like I think when Jacob Trouba was absolutely launching opposing players last season, when they went like 5-10-3 in November, just like that's when you're like, gosh, like Scott Stevens 2.0, like we need something to get us juiced up in game, whatever. But when I think this is something that it'll breathe a little bit of life. Like, I think after one loss, that's not the case. I think what really the issue is still getting accustomed to this kind of structure. Like, it's going to take a while to rid those old habits. And listen, part of that, I don't think is being, the power play as a crutch or the penalty kill as a crutch. Like, oh, we're really good with that. So, but part of it, like the power play and penalty kills been good all year. So when it fails, now you have to play a certain way to hang in the game when those fail, right? Like if you're in a postseason game and it's kind of shootout, okay, corral. Um, you don't score on 3 power plays. I mean, I think in the playoffs that would sink you, but you don't score on 3 power plays. You you allow 2 power play goals, like, and it's game 5, an elimination type game or one of those important games, 3-5 type of deal, like a momentum swinger. You can't just say, we didn't play full 60. And listen, of course, that's a response to a question, but you have to find a way to, even if it's not a full 60, like hang in 5-on-5, hang in. So I think what this really is, though, is a really good measuring stick for how New York Ranger prospects have been developed. Because Capo Caco with the pressure, Patrick Williams said this last week to us, right? Caco Loft with the pressure were brought in, and they had to adjust to the NHL level because it was like they had these phenom names coming out of the draft. I think this is a good opportunity to see what does a player look like that's conditioned through the juniors, played OHL time, played for the Wolfpack at a professional level. Something he said during the preseason was that he had to rid himself of those junior habits. Well, let's see. Now it's 4 months later. How did everything go down there? I mean, he scored 9 goals. He put up 23 points. So I think it's not necessarily a spark, but what I will say is I do think it is a great opportunity to see how our players develop down there. And it's a really good opportunity for him to say, I belong here. And I think that'll be really interesting because, Steve-O, week to week is the reported injury for Pitlick. 9 games. We're going to shed his entry level, right? I think that's the big question is that entry level contract going to be shredded? Do you think there's room for him in this lineup long term?
I do. Yes, I do. I think that answer right now in the mind of jury, if you envision it, I don't think that answer is answered. I think we're going to see out. I don't envision Pitlick coming back within the next 2 weeks. I think Othmann will have at least minimum of 2 weeks. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see. I think that they're going to see what he contributes. They're going to see how he fits in. How's the team playing overall? I don't think Pitlick is a big loss. I mean, last night I told you, I mean, I saw more of him last night than I did all season long. I mean, he was flying all over the ice. But I don't think Pitlick's a major piece. Now, obviously, you look at individual roles. I thought Pitlick, in what he was asked to do, wasn't bad. But again, I think we're gonna analyze Othmann 2-3 weeks down the line and see, where he's at, and it might be the best option to keep him up. So they might shred it, they might not. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think it's too early to answer that question as of right now, and I'm excited. I mean, this is what we all wanted to see. There was a chance I remember in the preseason that he made a strong argument that he really could have made the roster. If they
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to, and they made a decision. You know what? Not right now. Let's try Will Cooley. From what I saw back then, and given that I really think sending him back down really made a difference.
I
In
agree.
and I think he saw and got a taste of that, and he not to say that he got praised. I mean, it's a preseason, but the promise and the everything we were hearing was positive surrounding
Yeah,
him. So I think sending him down, it was the right thing to do. And you always knew that there was a really good chance you would see him this season. And boom, here he goes. He's got a shot.
you're right. And I think it's something that towards the end of the preseason, I had the chance to ask Lavi some questions about what he thought of Othmann's play. I had a chance to talk to Brennan Othmann a few times, some post game, some after some of the skates. And I think, like you said, there was a point in time where you knew he would be at like if the Johnny Brodzinski's staying up at this level, there was going to there was a point in time where you knew, Edstrom had that kind of like one and done call up, and it was kind of matchup based, right? I'm really interested to know why Edstrom actually wasn't called up. Um, I think maybe because it's a winger, but I'm curious. I think they figure that's why I think Benito's going to center the fourth line because they need a natural center, and I don't think they want to move Brodzinski. But anyway, I digress. You have Brodzinski up now longer term. He would naturally be the guy that would be called up. I think I do think it did surprise me a little bit that Othmann was the call up solely because of what the thinking is moving forward. Like, is this an opportunity for him to stay up long term? Because are you going to shred his entry level? And then, obviously you're always going to have the cap is something you're going to be concerned with. And that's going up over the summer according to the league, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully. With that said, even if that's the case, you still have some monster contracts coming up. And he still just turned 22. So I think the question is like, is this something we're going to see within the organization where we're going to see prospects, or even specifically for his case, like he's 22. Uh, you know, is this something where you're looking like we were waiting for an opportunity to bring him up? Was this just by happenstance of we needed a winger? Was this because you want to give him that opportunity and that shot? But it's obviously not. I mean, you know this too. Like, I don't think it's a response to the loss against Carolina.
No, it's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
But
But it's interesting, right? Like, what's you think he has a long term shot, and I think the one reason I question is because I think if he performs really well in his stint, he earns it. And obviously, I think it would be awesome. I think he has a lethal shot. He can definitely skate. He has an edge, which is awesome. Like Lafreniere also has that edge to his game. Physicality, throws the body, gets chippy. Like that. Uh, I think I just question, like, you know, if you bring him up, and I think Will Cooley brings a well-rounded game, and he's also playing third line minutes, right? So he's kind of in a little more of a shelter role. I think for Othmann, what his scouting report is, if he scores like two snipes, back-to-back games or whatever, like he starts popping off, and you keep him long-term, shred the ELC, which I'm curious to see what they do with that. And now he goes on a 10-game, no points, losing some confidence. Well, you burn the entry level, and now it's like February. That's an odd spot to be in, right?
it is, and I do agree with you. It is an interesting spot, and the reason I say uh, that he might stay up with this team because I always believed from the start when it came to Brennan Othmann that you bring him up, that's it. He's staying up. There's no bringing him back down. You're starting his clock. You're shredding that up.
Yeah.
I don't see him. I mean, you just can't. When it comes to a player like him and everything that surrounds him, he's just not a player you bring up and then send back down. It just you can't do that. So the reason I believe that he's here, and it's a weird time too because it's an injury. So I don't think
That's what's odd, right? Like,
it, it's odd. Listen, I really hope that it's not because we lost one game to Carolina and we look bad. Because again,
no,
everyone has bad losses. You can't think it's because of that.
no.
Maybe they think. Maybe they think that Pitlick is not an option moving forward, and that they wanna see what Othman brings, and they want to see let's get Kako back, and let's see what Othman has now. Let's bring Kako back. God knows what's going on with Heedle. Let's see what we have now, and that way when it's time to push for the playoffs, if we have these pieces, all we have to do is align the stones. To me, that's what this sounds like. But again, I just can't see you bringing Othman up for 2 weeks. I mean, that's just you can't do that in my opinion.
You know what? I see what you're saying, and I know it's a little bit like I'm working with the gray right now with what you're saying, but I get what you're saying. Like Kako, he seems to be progressing. You likely by the way, we never touched upon this. I feel like we never talk about the poor guy. Filipinos back in Czechia. I'm not going to speculate or spread rumors. I personally think that's a sign that it's going to be long term, right?
Yeah,
Like this is
for
a
sure.
very open-ended, long space period. Whatever's in between, we don't know. I think with Kako, he's progressing actually a lot better than I thought. And I'm thinking, this is my thinking. I think he'll be back February at
That-
some point in that range. He's going to
That'd
be
be
back
awesome.
before the playoffs, right? So with that, like you said, maybe this is just an opportunity to see how the lineup shake up the lineup a little bit by bringing up a player, giving excuse me, I had Stu tonight. It was really good. Giving him an opportunity to see what it's like at the NHL level. It's a good window of time. You already had your top call up called up. Like there were certain things that you know, we're talking about this back and forth. Maybe it was as simple as just like he was our next guy up. I know this is Chris Drury's like between Othmann and Cooley. Actually, I don't know if Cooley was under Drury. He
I don't think
wasn't.
it was.
Brennan Othmann, Gabriel Perreault, they're his like with Chris Drury at the helm. Those are his 2 first-round draft picks. Sikora was the top pick in 2022 when they didn't have a first rounder because they traded that for Andrew Copp. And look at how he's performing. He's been spectacular in the World Juniors. Perreault has been unworldly. Othmann has been a top prospect. So I do think also part of it is like the man in charge is still the man in charge, and I think he wants to see how his prospects develop. I'll take that spin too. With that, it will be interesting because the one thing I will say is I've talked to Pitlick one-on-one. I've talked to Jimmy Vesey. I really do think the fourth line is going to be vital to this team winning a championship.
Of
They
course.
are. You can't split them up. Like moving Nick Bonino down doesn't split them up, but you need those guys in the lineup. Like I think that's part of why they lost to New Jersey. And I think it's why in 2019-20 they like when they returned from the bubble, they just couldn't match Carolina. Because why is Jordan Martinook scoring a goal like that on Igor Shesterkin? He did it in the bubble too. Like net front dirty goal. You need those fourth liners, right? And I think they're doing a great job of shutting down top talent. I mean, I think in the games they played Jack Hughes and they played the Pasternak line, and they only gave up 2 goals between any of the players on both lines. So, I mean, that's phenomenal considering like you have a line you can match up against top NHL talent. Huge. Anyway, with that, you can't split them up. But that third line, I've said it for a little while now. I think they're kind of finding an identity because there's been some moving pieces, and I think they're looking for like what is the identity of this going to be moving forward. Othmann could add some juice to that and kind of change the look of it. Every team needs a third line to win a championship.
I agree. 100%. The way I see this, it's kind of like a status report. Like,
Mhm.
let's see. But again, like you said, it's funny because once, Pitlett's back to the lineup, what do we do with him? So this could be
He
simple
was
as,
a healthy scratch at one point.
yeah,
But again, that depends on if Othmann's going to be a mainstay. Like, it gives the organization it'll give the organization some clarity too, because if Othmann doesn't succeed as well as they hoped, I'm also curious to see, like, do they still keep him up? Because in the past, that's what they did with Kako. They never sent him down.
and that's what I thought that would happen with Othmann. I just didn't think we'd be seeing it, mid-January, and just the state of the team right now is in like just a funky limbo. So I don't know,
Yeah, because you have your Cooley is a regular rostered guy, and I think he's kind of in some ways anchored that third line. I love the game Brodzinski brings, but we've talked about that. Like, come playoff time, that'll be certainly a question too. Like, you're playing some of these top teams. I mean, last night you saw like you really need the juice from your top dogs. But do you want it affects the trade deadline? Do you want a heavy third line center? Are you going to trade for a third line center, Phil Hedel? More news comes out, or it's still like lingering around the deadline. Like you're going to need maybe a solidified 3C, or do you kind of roll with what you have? Do you like what you see from Brodzinski? Do you like what you see from Othmann and say, we're not even going to, really make a big move? I'm more in that corner. And I know we disagree on that.
Yeah, I think jury's definitely going to have to look to the market to see. The way I see this again, this next month we'll call it. This is a true status report right here. This is our final evaluation
January.
before we get to the trade deadline. This is going to be our final evaluation period to see, all right, what we need. And yes, the cap is so tight. Now you mentioned before we end here, Chives, I got one more hot take for you. I want you to digest. And it's when we play good teams. First of all, I want to mention before I throw the hot take at you, you mentioned Heedle.
Yeah.
Now I'm the one that's bouncing around. Phil Heedle is one of the most disappointing things of this Rangers season. I mean, I'm not expecting him to even know again this season. I mean, everything I'm hearing is not good at all, and it's just disappointing, man.
Yeah, you know what? And I think I care more about his health, because obviously you've seen in the past, like I said this, I don't know if it was like on one of the podcasts, maybe it was mind your pucking business. Great title, by the way. I said something along the lines of like some young players have escaped that. Sidney Crosby. Eric Lindros was able to play a little bit of a career with it. And then you saw with the Rangers organization itself with Michael Sauer, like he had a concussion. Now, granted, it was like I don't know exactly if that was a one-time thing. The news with who is that? Nolan Patrick, I almost said Nolan Ryan, second overall pick behind Nico Hischier. And he's like, 20, what is he? He's like 24, 25. Poor guy is like, there was rumors that he retired and then he was like, no, I didn't. But like, he hasn't really played much at the NHL level. He definitely hasn't played with the team he was traded to, Vegas. So I do think that's more the concern. But with what you're saying, he was a player that looked like an all-out stud, a kid that was coming into his own, right? Phil Heedle. It's something we really haven't touched upon, and I think it. I don't think there's like a hex around it, but it's odd to me that no one's really pointed to that. I do think also part of it is New York. They're only going to point to something like that if the team's losing, right? If you don't have Phil Heedle's monster, breakout that he's had the last 2 years, and the team's losing miserably this year, then you're looking saying, oh, well, only if we had Phil Heedle. But I think right now, because the team's succeeding, I don't think it's that no one cares. I just think it's, about his health or anything. But like you said, it is disappointing. I'm shocked that, we haven't heard a lot about that, about the impact of that and why that could be affecting, the chemistry on the third line.
I think 100%, and a lot of
He's a
fans
play driver, man, right? Like
he
he's got
really
speed.
is. He's a dog. I mean, last year when he was clicking, I mean, he had that like goal streak. I mean, this team was driving, and he is a player in the system. So I mean, I think he's being left out in a lot of the conversation, and especially when this team loses. All right, circling back to the final point here. Moving forward, we're going to be taking on the Blackhawks Canadians. I think Chives in big games, and again, games against Blackhawks, Canadians, lower tier teams, Columbus, that's not going to matter. But as we shift towards the playoffs here, Chives, when this team is offensively not clicking, I think the Rangers need their goalies, whether it's Igor Shesterkin or Jonathan Quick. I'm mainly looking at Igor, though. The Rangers really need their goalies to play head over their heels. They really do when the offense is not clicking. And look at a couple games this year. That game we just beat Boston 2-1. Igor played fantastic in that game. Offense wasn't popping in that game, but the goaltending was fantastic in that game. I go back to way earlier in the season. We beat the Penguins on the road 1-0. Quick played an outstanding game in that, and our offense really looked horrible in that game. So I think, when the offense is not clicking, or the playoffs, how about this? Whether the offense is clicking or not, the Rangers really need their goaltenders to play head over their heels 100%. And up to this point, I don't think that's been the result. Minus, again, it's too inconsistent, too bipolar. Do you agree with that?
Where I disagree is I don't think it's shouldered by Quick and Igor 100% in those losses. And I think it's not really like a blame game or whatever. I think there's two theories, right? And you're kind of going with like you're as good as your goalie. And then there's also winning from the net out. But part of winning from the net out is scoring. You got to score, right? And especially, I think what makes the Rangers different than the other teams in the Metro is the caliber and the age that their star players are at. The Penguins are a little bit over the hill. So a lot of what their players do is like, holy, bleep, Sidney Crosby is still leading the league in goals. It's like, but for the Rangers, none of these guys are so old that it's like, oh, wow, he's actually performing well for an old guy. And I don't think the young guys are at a point where obviously they've been under the microscope for a while. So a Lafreniere, there's going to be still more expected from him. It's just, I think, I'm talking about the mindset of the market, but I think on the ice, what I'm saying, I mean, sometime like last night, I thought you were there. I thought Igor made a few solid saves that normally would keep a team in the game. Timely might be a little bit of a different story, right? It's weird because this team loses games, and when they lose them bad. The only game I can recall where they were close and then it opened up again was against Toronto at home.
Yep.
The 7-3 loss. But otherwise, I feel like last night, they need some goal support. But I do understand what you're saying. Like, it has been a little while since we saw Igor take over a game. Even if it's a 3-3 game, like take over, have that big stand up moment. So I'll give you that. But I also do think that there's a lot more that is in front of the goalies that, how many odd man rushes. But I will say, there were times where I remember Matthews cruising in and scoring. Like it was the same thing as yesterday, like a minute into the period, and it just deflates everything. When if your goalie does make the save, it's a little bit of a different game. But right now, based on some of the systematic failures, I think that's honestly some of the last concern, especially with the way Quick is played.
Do you think, I'll throw this at you, and again, we've seen it. I don't want to say necessarily last night because I do think probably like 3 of those goals were not Igor's fault. Like there was nothing he could do for the and to stop those goals. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
defense did, and just overall, didn't help him out at all. I mean, again, the puck was flying around the ice. You got Panarin throwing the puck around the ice like a football. I mean, we were just all over the place last night. But do you think that, and this goes for the whole season, Igor's inconsistencies, you think Jonathan Quick is messing with his head a little bit or has something to do with it? Whereas we put Quick in there and the team plays better. Do you think that's messing with Igor a little bit? Because again, last year that was really something. Igor was always the number one. And Halak was always seen as a number two in recent years. But do you think this year? Do you think it's messing with him a little bit?
You know what? I'm going to stand and I'm going to put all that speculation to rest. No, I think they have a really good relationship on the ice at practice. Like they work together as much as, and this sounds silly, but they're working with each other more than working with anyone else. Igor can be a jokester on the ice too. Like he'll mess around. Last practice, like he was faking like Kreider was in front to like tip pucks. And like he went out there and was like pretending to tip pucks. You saw him in that game, like kind of waving at Nason's stick. I think he's a personality. I think he's a goalie. He's an interesting character. In terms of the gameplay, though, I do think that's more strictly with Igor. And the strange thing, and I think this is interesting, and I'm not calling out our guy Valley. We all love you, Valley. Ranger
Yes.
loves Valley. He's the best. I think it's interesting because there hasn't been one thing. Like I vividly recall 2014 playoffs. It was like if you could score on Corey Crawford's glove, you can win the series. But like there's nothing right now that points to like one spot on Igor that like he's got to shore up. I just feel he's been on the wrong ends of some of the team's poorer efforts. I really believe that. Um, I don't think he's been completely, his Vezina caliber. But listen, like, the 2022 season type of play. And I think it's funny because you think we're better defensively, I think now. But I will dispel that and say I don't think any of that is mental for him. At least for how Quick's performing. I think Quick's performance and how he's doing is its own thing. I think for Igor, it's more about how he's playing and how he wants to approach his own game. Because at the end of the day, he's getting those starts too. I think that he knows that he is the club starter. And Quick is making it an interesting case because he's doing so well. As a backup, he views himself, he was a starter. He views himself as a one goalie. But I think, now that we're talking about this, I need someone out there. And I can right now. But we need a way to label, I think, this tandem. Because I think we're throwing around the word starter, number one, backup, and it franchise goalie. Like, I feel like none of those terms are really fitting either of them this year. It's like Quick is the backup, but he's performing so well. And they're also kind of getting almost an even cut of the games, but Igor usually gets like maybe one more, and he hasn't performed as well as he has in the past and this season. You know what I mean? Like, it's very odd.
I agree with you,
I
and
don't know if I've
that
ever
was
seen the sitch. With Lundqvist, you never saw it. You saw that weird three-headed rotation in 2019, but that ended with COVID.
yeah. I think. Listen, I'm glad you gave me that answer because that's exactly what I was looking for, and I was gonna say the exact same thing. I'm glad that we get to agree with something here to wrap up the episodes. I think it's more of the system than Igor himself.
Right?
Igor is a very aggressive goaltender. I think he's one of the more aggressive goaltenders in the league. But I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing in his game. Yeah, he's made some bad mistakes recently, and last night he's definitely made some poor decisions. But there weren't anything major to cost him the game. I think when you look at the games, I'm looking at that Toronto game, that was 7-3. I'm looking at that game in Ottawa. I'm looking at last night. These weren't games that I thought Igor cost us the game. I thought that our play overall, like just everybody, especially defensively in our zone, our play has been so poor, and it's just that Igor is just an answer to that solution. And he's
Mm-hmm.
just a product of the system, and the system is failing Igor right now. And really, it's sloppy, and we're not on the same page. And to me, that's not the goaltending. I don't think there really hasn't been a game, maybe one or two, couple games from Igor. Again, you're gonna get that, from your goaltender where that's just not your night. But a lot of these losses, and again, last night was not Igor's fault. I agree with you. It's the system, not the goaltender. So I'm glad we get to agree on something before the episode ends.
Like, if it's come the playoffs, again, everything we always talk about is the playoffs, right? Um, you know, if that's a performance, first of all, I think the game looks a lot different if it's the playoffs.
Of
I just
course.
think the energy is different in MSG. Like, there's a whole lot more to a playoff style game. But part of the conversation in the preseason and from Laviolette's presser was getting this team prepared to play playoff hockey from the preseason, from training camp moving forward. And that's something that they still got to work on because, like we said, I think even for a player like Igor, you know, he had to bounce back in that Penguin series in 22, right? Like, big time. He got shellacked in, like, I think it was game 3 and 4 or something, right?
Yep.
In Pittsburgh. I do think that's an important piece to the puzzle. And as much as I think it's fully on the system play, not even just system, but the execution of what the Rangers are trying to do, I also do think there is like 1% though that you're like, if Igor was playing at another level, maybe things change. Maybe he saves maybe a type of like sure goal or makes a like monster, like that was kind of a ridiculous save. Maybe it changes things. But that's not something I think you blame on the goalie either. I don't think it's like, oh, we should have expected that. I'm just saying every now and then, if you do get that, it could swing things in your favor.
I agree. And listen, you look at those 2 goals last night. Penalties weren't on Igor.
Mm-hmm.
They scored on the power play, and again, not Igor's fault. So I agree. Product of the system. So I'm glad we agree on that. Something to wrap up our episode here today. Listen, I'm excited for Othman, and I'm sure everybody else should be. This is going to be very interesting to see. And again, I think that plays to our larger point that we're doing a big status report. We're evaluating this because we all know. You mentioned the playoffs. Playoffs come around, Chives. This ice is shrinking, and Artemi Panarin, love it or not, playoffs is not his time of year. Ice shrinks. He kind of gets neutralized. The smaller guys tend to get neutralized. Vinny T. So if these guys are gonna, I don't want to say fizzle out, but they're gonna get neutralized. And again, if we're playing a Florida team, we're playing a Carolina team. These are teams that are really good at doing this. So we need to evaluate. Okay, Panarin's neutralized. Trocheck's neutralized. Who else we got? What gives us the best option to win? And I think that's what we're doing right now in analyzing all the options we got. And we're starting that process right now to start 2024 because the trade deadline's coming. And again, we're really tight in terms of cap space, but if we need to go out and get a 3C, or just again, man, it's tight. I know that we're not talking trade deadline preview, but it is so tight, man. But I believe Jury. He's the king of masterclass. So again, plays to the bigger point. We're evaluating right now.
The king of masterclass. Yeah. I don't think Chris Drew will ever hear this, but boy, wouldn't that be funny.
Well, that us wrap us up here for this episode of Puck Talk CS. We got the Blackhawks coming up, we got the Canadians, and we have a big, a big special guest looming in the near future. So stay tuned for that. Follow us always on Puck Talk CS on the Instagram, on YouTube, and of course all of our platforms. Othmann's here. We're ready, Chives. Let's see it. LGR, everyone, and always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.